Heading to the wild west coast of Wales with country tracks in an hour. First though, on BBC One, the big questions are up for discussion with Nikki Campbell.
Welcome to the Big Questions. I'm Nikki Campbell. The revelation that the Pope, when a cardinal delayed the defrocking of a convicted paedophile priest for 6 years, has rocked the Catholic Church. Our first big question, should the Pope resign? This victim of abuse by a priest says this Pope knew it was endemic and covered it up. Gordon Brown kicked off his general election campaign this week by trumpeting his middle-class values and attacking the Tory front bench for being basically too posh. Our next big question, does class matter? Jade Goody's mother says class is irrelevant. Anyone can be successful. Alcohol causes over 13,000 deaths and injuries on Britain's roads every year. The plans to slash drink driving limits have been shelved because of the election. Our last big question, should drivers drink? We're in Peckham in South London at the excellent Harris Academy with a marvellous local audience, and sitting for us on high this morning we have got a very special panel for you. We've got the radio talk show host James O'Brien, the Queen's chaplain and Hackney vicar Reverend Rose Hudson-Wilkin, the writer and broadcaster Christina O'Doney, and the senior political editor of The New Statesman, Mehdi Hassan. In 1978, Father Stephen Keasley was put on probation for tying up and molesting 2 boys, despite his own request to be defrocked. Backed up by his bishop in California, the then Cardinal Ratzinger, now the Pope, delayed his eventual removal until 1987. Keasley was later sentenced to 6 years for abusing a young girl. Should the Pope resign? And in Jack Valero, from Catholic Voices, in this letter that has emerged, and there is a long trail, if you look into this, of letters, this phrase, which troubles so many people: the good of the universal church needs to be considered in any defrocking.
Right. This letter actually deals only with one aspect, which is the defrocking. It doesn't deal with the child abuse, which was dealt with by another department. This seems to be a standard letter that was done at the time.
But what does that mean? The good of the universal church needs to be considered in any defrocking. Little boys, little girls.
Yes,
according to this man, he had abused tons of them. His own words.
It was known that he had abused 2 and he had been suspended. So he didn't have access to children. There was no cover-up. There was no further abuse. So the matter was being considered, and eventually he was defrocked. This man, Cardinal Ratzinger...
In 1985, can I just correct something there? He volunteered and was moved to a youth ministry, St. Joseph's in California in 1985.
Right.
So if you actually do follow what went on, that's hang on, Jackie. That's not the case.
Apparently he didn't. He was suspended for that period, and he didn't abuse. But let me go back to the initial question.
Then he was brought back.
Where? To children? No, he was suspended. He was suspended all that time. And if I can go back to the original question, because Cardinal Ratzinger was only marginally involved until 2001. He wanted to be more involved in dealing with the cases, but it was only in 2001 when he was asked by Pope John Paul to deal with this mess of sexual abuse. And he is the one in the Vatican who's done most to solve this problem. He wanted to deal with it. Once he got the job in 2001, he speeded up the cases. He had realized that this defrocking business took too long. The cases went on and on for years. The priest who had been accused, even if found guilty, could appeal. So he got rid of all this, the statute of limitation.
He was an acknowledged paedophile who was guilty, who wanted to be defrocked, and this went on for 9-10 years. Peter Saunders, you were abused, and your brother abused by priests when you were a small child. Do you acknowledged that this particular Pope has led the way?
I think the Pope, the current Pope, would appear to have a lot to answer for, and I'll be very interested. I'll be very interested to see how that unravels. But I was talking to a woman in Manchester yesterday, Nikki, called Audrey, and I want to say hello to Audrey, when I was debating whether I would be able to come down on the programme today. And she had been abused by Catholic nuns when she was a child. And she said, please, Peter, go on the programme and speak for those who had been abused. Now, I don't purport to speak for everybody that's been abused. I work for NAPAC, as you know, we support adult survivors of child abuse. But before you interrupt, a couple of weeks ago, I was at a male survivor conference in New York, and I was in a seminar group with 9 or 10 other people, a couple of women, the rest were guys. And towards the end of the presentation, what chap sat to my right mentioned that he'd been abused by a Catholic priest. I said, well, same here, same with my brother. The guy behind said, yes, it happened to me as well. The guy to my left said, yes, Catholic priest as well. The guy doing the presentation, the psychologist, said, yes, I was abused at school by the Catholic priest. 2 other people in the room had been abused by their rabbi. So it was a male survivor conference, so you'd expect the people there to be survivors. But this is a massive problem.
Should he resign? Is there any other...
Nikki, you're asking the wrong person, because I'm a Christian and I don't believe that there is a role for somebody called the Pope, because it's not biblical. Yeah. I was brought up as a Roman Catholic. I still have great sympathy for the many millions of good Christian Catholics around the world that follow their faith, but I sadly feel that they have been let down very, very badly by the institution led by the current Pope.
Christina O'Donnell, there is a... We'll come back in a minute. Yeah. And also Clifford. But there is a very, very dubious and suspicious paper trail if you look at this, if you actually read everything about this. And there was a lot of dither and at the very least a lot of delay here. And not only that, we also have the case not only of Keasley, that a horrific case of him, but we also have the case of Father Murphy, the abuse of 200 deaf boys in the school in Wisconsin, and the Arizona priest Michael Teta. And Cardinal Ratzinger knew about them all. Can you think of another institution if this happened, that the man at the top would not have to go?
But Nikki, you're comparing it to the CEO of Shell, let's say, and it isn't like that.
Social services, education?
It isn't like that. This is a spiritual institution, and he's the spiritual leader of that institution. But let's go on. Of course, there is nothing worse than abusing the trust of children and their parents. And for that, it is, it's disgusting what's happened. It is awful. It is stomach-churning.
There is something worse. There is something worse. Subsequently extended more sympathy and care to the abuser than the abused.
But what I think we have to remember is that this has been going on for many, many years, and that what this Pope is trying to do is to clean up the structure. He's not doing it fast, I agree, and he should be firing all kinds of his spokesmen, all kinds of bishops and cardinals who seem to be taking under their own local authority
Christina, he's part of that structure.
But he's not part of that structure. He is supposed to be cleaning it up, and he is trying to clean it up. And if we say to him, let's get rid of you, you must resign, blah, blah, we're not solving the problem. He is part of the solution. He can clean up this act.
I think what Christina highlights is what an absolutely horrible time it is at the moment to be a Catholic, because what you find yourself feeling the need to do is defend your faith, which is a very personal and often a very important thing, by somehow trying to manufacture a defensive behaviour which you know is indefensible. The spiritual element, I'm afraid, is a red herring, because as someone who has wrestled with Catholicism all his life and then sees stories like this as being evidence of the reason why secularism often seems to win, confession is a crucial sacrament in the Catholic Church, and confession is contingent upon 2 things. It's contingent upon a full and frank disclosure of how you have sinned and what you have done wrong. And then you perform an act of penance. So while I'm very uncomfortable with the witch hunt mentality that the Catholic Church across the world appears to be under attack from at the moment, I would like to see the head of the Church make a full and frank confession. And as an act of penance, I think resignation would be commensurate with the scale of the crimes that have been committed.
Clifford, a Catholic journalist.
If I had been abused by a priest, I think the Pope resigning 20 times would not be enough to measure my anger and my hurt.
I think we should just ask people that have, Clifford, with the greatest of respect, rather than speculate on how they might feel about something.
Well, all I'm really trying to say is I entirely and completely endorse and understand their anger, but I think we have to see this in a much broader context and ask ourselves what has been going on inside the Vatican. And what we see, if we look there closely, and this is only beginning to emerge now, is a power struggle. The power struggle, on the one hand, by people surrounding Pope John Paul II, including especially Cardinal Sodano, the Secretary of State, who at every turn was trying to thwart efforts by Ratzinger, now the Pope, to get this problem dealt with properly.
Problem?
Now,
children were being abused.
True,
Little children were being abused.
If that is true, then we are looking in the wrong direction as to who is responsible.
Peter Saunders.
Yeah, I mean, we tend to...
Problem. What do you think of that word problem?
The problem, well, Christina mentioned it's been going on for a long time. I mean, if we go back to... we were talking about the head of the Roman Catholic Church. If we go back to the Bible, Jesus came to actually demolish religion. He came to do away with institutions like the Catholic Church. He came to enable us to have a relationship with God without interference from others and to have a direct line. But one of the things that, and I'm not a great biblical scholar, but one of the things that struck me about the Bible and what Jesus said was that if you hurt a child, and he didn't come and condemn anybody, but his strongest words were for people who hurt children. Take away the innocence of a child, better that you hadn't been born. So let's not start talking about power struggles within the Vatican.
With your position is that you're saying you don't want any popes at all. So not only should this pope resign, but all other popes
I'm not saying the Pope should resign. I don't think there is a case for the Pope.
Look at this question, the specific question of whether or not this man...
But why the delay? You say there's a power struggle. This sounds a bit arcane with respect.
Well, it is arcane. It's very difficult to penetrate.
Why the delay for 9 years? I mean, if he did do anything, he did it at a snail's pace.
I don't know the answer to that. And there have been a number of cases, 4 or 5 cases, where it's quite clear there is an issue of judgment and whether Ratzinger made a right call or a wrong call.
And
but in the overall
if he had,
context...
and this is key, if you'll allow me, Clifford,
yes.
An issue of judgment, a similar lack of judgment, where there had been a question mark over his judgment or a cloud over his judgment, any other institution, Christina says this is different, but any other institution, an educational institution, social services institution, he would be toast.
No, we have got to ask ourselves, is he part of the problem or part of the solution? And what is emerging is that he may well be the key to the solution to this.
Gerard.
It's not emerging.
You're from Protest the Pope. You're going to get on the streets and protest when he comes.
It's a campaign.
Just so people know where you come from on this.
Yeah, where I come from, the campaign basically says that the Pope shouldn't be honoured with a state visit.
Why not?
Because if you look at the Pope's views and the activities of the Vatican on a wide range of issues, whether it's AIDS and condoms, whether it's abortion, whether it's euthanasia,
what about this
whether
issue?
it's child abuse.
This issue?
Well, we think basically... OK, on this issue specifically, I think let's come back to Ratzinger. Ratzinger, many people might not know this, spent 24 years as what we would call the head of the Inquisition, broadly. It's got a different name. But that's broadly what it is. Now, the role of that office is important to understand. What happened was that all grave cases of child sexual abuse had to go to his office.
That's
he knew
not true.
about them.
Only from
Okay,
2001
let me carry
onwards.
on. You've had your word. That's true.
No, it's not true.
So he knew about it. Now, he failed to stop it, and he covered it up. How do we know
dealt
that?
with all defrocking.
How do we know that?
There was
How do we know that? I'm being instructed by the Catholic apologists there. How do we know that? We know that because the Panorama programme in 2006 demonstrated clearly with evidence, and the Ryan report subsequently has continued to demonstrate this. In 2001, Ratzinger issued a secret edict to all his bishops across the world. He said, in all cases of grave child sexual abuse, you must A, be secret, B, not report it to police, but report it to my office. Report it to my office. Report it to my office. People who were abused, he told the bishops, you should basically, not coerce, but you should persuade them not to tell anybody else on pain of excommunication.
That's a lie.
If that's so, let me ask why the guidelines that were introduced in this country, called the Nolan Guidelines, make no mention at all of this document saying nothing must be reported to the police. Why did it not, in fact, why did it say all cases must be reported to the police? Now, if that was contrary to Vatican policy, they wouldn't have been allowed to do that.
Maybe, Hassan, you've been trying to come in on this. Do you feel it's an intrusion onto private grief, or do you think it's something that...
It's not an intrusion at all. I mean, I sympathise with the Catholics here having to defend the Pope. I'm a Muslim. I spend most of my life defending Islam from crazy Muslims. It's what we want to do. It's part of our faith. We feel defensive. But Christina and the gentleman here, I have to object. It's not a spiritual issue. It's not a religious issue.
No, it's not a spiritual
Child
issue.
rape is not a spiritual issue. It's a criminal issue. So there's no double standards. There's no separate exemptions because it's a spiritual institution.
Absolutely.
Not at all. But the problem is, of course, Nicky, is that he can't resign. He's infallible. There's a doctrine of papal infallibility. He can't commit any... No, I'm just saying if he
can resign, there is a mechanism.
But if he resigns, where does that leave the idea that he's an infallible leader?
He's only infallible when he's speaking ex cathedra.
But here's the big issue I take here. The gentleman here said at the beginning he wants to clean things up. He's the man to do it.
He has been doing it.
He wanted to do things. Let's take the Wisconsin case. They wrote 2 letters for America about this priest who abused 200 deaf boys. 2 letters. How many times did Ratzinger reply to them? None. No responses whatsoever. Yeah. If he wanted to get involved, why didn't he respond to letters? That priest, Father Murphy, died a priest. Yeah. He was buried in his clerical vestments. He should have been buried in prison. And I hold the Pope responsible for that.
Absolutely right.
Sorry.
Now, I see there are lots of hands up. I'm going to come around the audience in a second. We haven't heard from the Reverend Rose yet. We'll keep those hands up so I know what you want to speak. Reverend Rose, if an Archbishop of Canterbury had behaved in this way and had displayed this kind of delay, would he still be in situ?
The expectation probably would be that they would resign. But I just want to say that I'm not calling for anyone to resign because I'm not sure resignations is going to make the situation any better. And perhaps throughout this country, all over the place, there are people in leadership, bishops, etc., who are aware that these things are happening. You know, has there been an error of judgment from the church? Most definitely, in terms of the decisions that are taken to keep someone still in ministry who has done this abhorrent thing. And so I think this has not just impacted on the Catholic Church, this has impacted on the church. The church, all those who profess the Christian faith. You know, I am ashamed that this has happened. I'm not a Catholic, but I am ashamed that this has happened because I am the church as well. And so I think that the church's leadership, whether they be Catholic, Protestant, or whatever they may be, really need to think seriously about trying to protect the institution and actually respond to the people.
Well, that's what they have been doing.
But this is
they have been protecting the institution above all.
Yes.
No, just a minute. These stories now are not about making the Catholic Church safe. The Catholic Church is safe with these procedures that we've had from 2001. It's very safe for children now, the Catholic Church. We are talking now about finding out who was covering up the thing in the past so that they can be accountable for it.
We have the case of, is it David Pearce in this country who was, I think...
Yes, of course, you can never get rid of all the paedophiles, but now
he was moved on to another position.
The procedures are that you are out now. Now he's been reported, he's out.
He was moved. I promised, Clifford, I promise I will come back to you. But the Pearce case, of course, was in 2008. Let's go to audience. So brief comments, if you would. A lot of people want to come in quickly.
Thanks.
Good morning.
The last Pope to resign, I think, was in 1415, and I don't believe it will happen now. The current Pope has a lot to answer for, but I don't believe it makes his position untenable.
OK, thank you. Good morning.
Will any of these priests actually be put in front of a court of law?
Some have.
They've all had.
Other paedophiles and then be put to prison? Because that's one thing you never hear.
But in Ireland, of course, there is the situation that there were to be no prosecutions. That was part of or namings. That was part of the deal for the Ryan report as well, which is something we might well come on to. Good morning. Yes, in the middle with the red.
Good morning. I'm a Christian like that gentleman down there, and in the epistles, Paul talks about keeping away from certain people who have erred away from the faith, and those people who have erred away from the faith, that they should be backbenched and they should be taught and should be condemned, but they should be allowed to move away from their ministry. So if Catholics or the Catholic Church professes to be a church, but yet doesn't abide by the Bible that they read, it really, really confuses me that the Pope can't really abide by what he's actually professing.
I think we shouldn't be standing and trying to call for the Pope to resign. I think people should be asking the question, Why is it that people in leadership continue to abuse their leadership and nobody's actually taking responsibility? Because there are so many people in leadership who do many things that we know, and these things have been covered up. So we should be saying that everyone who is in leadership, people need to start taking responsibility of the way they lead. I think that is something that we
Clifford, in a sense, Christine. Yeah.
I think this is absolutely right. And I think that what we want as a people and as a community of believers is for the Pope to talk clearly. And I think that where I am, whereas I don't believe at all that he should resign, and I don't believe even that he is part of the cover-up. I do believe that he's part of the solution. But I do think that what he needs to do is to speak openly and clearly and to say, for everything that has happened, I am begging your forgiveness.
But he's not, Christine, is he?
No, but
Which
I
he's
am
doing.
saying...
He didn't say a word about it.
No, I know.
He
but
dismissed it as petty gossip.
What's the penance?
Petty gossip is the phrase he used.
The penance is for him to start saying to anybody who colludes with the crime to be handed over to the civil authorities.
I don't believe anybody who's achieved high office in the Catholic Church could not have been aware that this was widespread, institutional, and it's the cult of self-preservation that is most obnoxious in this entire business. An abused child, a priest. Who are you going to look after, Pope? The priest. That's what stinks.
I agree that what we're looking at here is a horrible abuse of trust and of the most vulnerable people. But we're talking about should he resign? And I say no, because he has the keys to solve this problem. He knows who is guilty now.
Would you apply that, Christina, to anyone else in any other walk of life?
Okay, as we said, Michael Walsh, Catholic journalist, historian, thinker, the whole gamut. Michael.
Renaissance man.
Renaissance man. Don't mention the
Well,
Renaissance.
no, I mean,
that's
another bad time.
A little bit too much, I think. Listen, should he resign?
Well, I'm the wrong person to ask that because I think he should never have been elected in the first place. But but yes, I think he should resign. Why should he resign? To be honest, he wrote rather a good letter to the church in Ireland.
Expressing shame.
Expressing shame, yes, and telling people that they had, for the first time, I think, that priests ought to be brought before the tribunals, the civil tribunals. JP2, John Paul II, had the chance to do that in a letter he wrote many years ago to the priests, and he didn't do that. So this is, I must say, he's been rather better on that. But why do I think he should resign? I think he should resign because what has caused all this sex abuse? It's the culture among the clergy, it seems to me, the culture of secrecy among the clergy, their closeness to each other, aided and abetted by celibacy, though I'm not necessarily attacking celibacy because I don't think there's a direct relationship between pedophilia and celibacy at all. But I do think that it is part of the culture, and that cannot be changed by the present Pope because he's part of that culture. In the letter to the Irish bishops, he said, a letter to the Irish Church, sorry, it wasn't to the bishops, a letter to the Irish Church, he said, how do we get out of this? We want to go back. He did say, well, he didn't say the words I'm going to use because I can't remember the exact phrase, but it was go back to the old-fashioned religion. We want to go back to what it used to be like. Before Vatican II, he was more or less saying. Yes. He said the misinterpretation of Vatican II. Vatican II was a reforming council. We are now faced with it seems to me, we're faced with the biggest crisis the Church has faced since the Reformation. The Reformation, we had a reforming council, we had the Council of Trent, but we also had a reforming leadership. We don't have a reforming leadership in the Catholic Church. And until we get that reforming leadership, until there's a change at the top, we won't move forward. That's my view.
And the scale of that change is so immense and so epic and so almost unable to contemplate it, that it will take something as enormous as a papal resignation to send a message through the entire church, through the upper echelons of the church, that this matters this much.
No, what you need to do is you reform who speaks out for the church. And we've had some dodos speaking out for the church and for the Vatican. We've had a man who compared what the church is going through to what Jews were going through in World War II. Whoever is, whoever is capable
that was the Pope's
of
personal preacher.
I am saying to you that we have bad spokesmen at the moment. We don't need to change.
Presumably the Pope has some say in who his personal preacher is.
No, of course, he inherited him. And what we want is for the Pope to say, off with you. We can't have people like this. We can't have spokesmen who
I'm going to give the last word to
the
last word must go. I promise to come back to you, Clifford.
Thank you.
And why should this Pope remain in office?
I think we have to understand there has been a change in the way society and the church views this problem of paedophilia 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was regarded as a mental illness that was capable of being treated. We now regard it as a crime, and that is the way to deal with it.
Well, we've always known about the compulsive nature.
The church has been slow to catch up with this change
despicable.
from mental illness to crime.
Absolutely despicable. An abused child has always known about the true scale and
I'm
horror
not disagreeing
of
with you.
paedophilia.
You're misunderstanding me. I'm not
you
saying,
misunderstand
I'm
who
not
matters in this
condoning it. I'm
debate.
saying
Not
they were
20-year-old psychology, but
Listen,
abused
James,
children
they were
still
wrong.
suffering from the
Clifford,
effects.
okay, wait,
They were
Clifford.
wrong to think it was a mental illness, but that's what they did think. They thought it could be treated. Therapists were employed, not police officers. It ought to have been in the hands of the police from the start, but that was the
Not in the
mistake they
90s,
made.
Clifford.
Yes,
That was the
as
mistake
recently
they
as
made
20
of
years.
thinking it was treatable, and it wasn't treatable,
That's
so
an
the
excuse,
paedophiles
I'm
went
afraid.
back
That's
into
an
their
excuse,
ministry.
not an explanation.
Okay, listen. I feel we've reached an impasse on this one, but thank you all very much indeed. Thank you for talking so honestly about that. I think a lot of people will